Live and direct, live and I take no jive.
Legalize it.
So how much can a koala bear? Koala bear, koala bear. Koala bear. Barry pulls a joint out of his pocket. Bill says, "Great, Barry, a reefer."
Hi, welcome back. It's another episode of the Koala podcast, and I am on the video, or up the tree, as I like to say, to the UK this week. Arron got in touch with me, I think last week or the week before, about his new website, CannaBias, which is cannabis rated by patients. And I think in the UK, this is particularly important because the sort of people who are entering the UK market to sell medical cannabis remind me a lot of the Australian approach. Some of the same people, and in my book they're entirely dodgy, and it's all about money, not about medical cannabis. So it's good to see patients are doing this in the UK, especially in an environment, even in Australia they have a decent medical cannabis environment, but I think in the UK government is so disinterested in the way that this operates. There's no information whatsoever, and I like to throw in a couple of things. I noticed that Curaleaf are trying to obviously do some sort of deal with the NHS before anything actually happens, which scares the bejesus out of me. Really interested to speak to Arron to learn a bit more about just basically from a patient's point of view where we are in the UK. And when I buy my weed in the UK, well, it's my nephew's man rather than my man when I come and visit. But this is the problem. I come to the UK after living overseas for 40 years, and it's exactly the same as when I was 16 years old in the late 70s, early 80s. I see nothing has changed whatsoever, except for some people with connections to the Tory party are making shitloads of money. So it's good to see that your sort of what you're doing is beginning to bubble up, because the only way we're going to see change in the UK is information and activism combined.
Yeah, well, that was a really, really, really fascinating intro. There was lots of good information there. I didn't actually know about Curaleaf, so I'm
earlier in this year,
that.
they're suddenly doing stuff with people who are connected, and it's all about Curaleaf. Nobody will ever say this publicly, especially your prohibition partners. It's all about Curaleaf getting their little tentacles into the NHS just in case something happens, and suddenly, like a Palantir or similar, they are the supplier to the UK government. The way that these US businesses do their business isn't very dissimilar if you look at the way that they deal with government contracts, and that's what Curaleaf. All they're doing is calling it research at the moment, but they wouldn't be spending the money if they didn't think they'd be making their money back 10 times over.
Of course, and that's the commercial environment that healthcare sits in, essentially. And I suppose my journey started off 8 years ago. I was at a protest, and I'm not a massive activist, but I found myself outside the House of Parliament. We sat down, we had cups of tea, there was a cannabis plant, there were MPs, and back then the voice of patients was really strong. There was lots of noise, there was lots of activism, and it feels that in my eyes, the longer we've gone into commercialization,
it has dissipated.
And
you're quite right, from a distance
it's just gone.
I mean, it's classic dissipation. There's more suppliers on the market supplying. I don't know. You and patients can tell me the quality of the product, but you don't hear patients' voices as much as you did just prior to COVID. And you actually had people in government like Blunt who were talking about this sort of stuff. I reckon he was done in. I reckon there's a BBC drama series in there in 5 years' time. I just sense there's that Whitehall, the private business connection stuff going on, that we're both Brits. We know how the system works in the UK, and you don't find stuff out till much later.
There's people talk about fake news and conspiracy theories are always a conspiracy until they're proven, and they're not. And it's a very, we live in a world at the moment where the authority of information is really critical, and having an understanding and traceability is even more critical. Yet in healthcare, it's kind of presumed in most disciplines that is available.
I
But
mean, look,
equally,
just quickly to explain to US listeners, because a lot of my
mm,
listeners are US or they're down in Australia. In terms of being a medical cannabis patient in the UK, you register with the medical cannabis private company. Does that information stay on their databases, or does that have to be shared with government? How do we know officially what a cannabis medical cannabis patient is in the UK? Can you give a little bit of insight into that?
yeah. So realistically, there's nearly 20 million people plus that are eligible at the moment for medical cannabis. Essentially, in the UK, you go to your GP, you have to be prescribed two forms of medication, and this isn't medical advice, by the way, of course. You are prescribed two forms of medication for the same condition, which makes you eligible in most cases. Again, I'm not a clinician. You then speak to a private clinic. The private clinic will prescribe you certain forms of medication. And then from that point, every clinic there's little standardization between clinics. So some clinics give patients a lot of information and do regular checkups, and some clinics less so. So it's a very, like I said, inconsistent and understandardized experience that a patient gets, and this information isn't shared with regulators or the NHS in its fullest, because even down to the number of patients in the UK at the moment, there isn't a definitive answer.
And those
So,
individuals prescribing at those clinics, what education or
mm,
what allows them to be a prescriber, I suppose is the best. Can I just walk in and say, you know what, I've smoked weed all my life. Can I prescribe cannabis? Do they have to have been a GP? What is it that allows? Are they a registered nurse? What is that what is it that a company is hiring in
mm,
terms of an individual that allows them to say, after the GP has seen you, I can decide what product you're getting?
mm. So the difference is that in the UK, GPs typically wouldn't prescribe you medical cannabis. So because you have to go to a private clinic, you tend to find that those GPs that are seeing you day to day in their spare time, or they take extra work with the private clinics. From my understanding, in fact, I don't understand what is a necessary prerequisite for a clinician to be able
Well,
to prescribe
and
medical
that's good. I'm
cannabis.
glad
I'm
you
not
say that, because
certain.
if you don't understand, nobody
Mm.
understands, basically, do they?
Well, presumably it's just any clinician, but there isn't a set level of experience required in cannabis for a clinician to, I know that there is no threshold,
And
standard
how would you
threshold in
define a
place.
clinician?
How would I define a clinician? A clinician is someone who has gone through formal healthcare training, and is qualified in a particular area, specialism. That would be how I would describe a clinician, unless they're GP, general practitioner. But again, I'm not a medical professional myself, so I'm looking from an entirely different perspective from the outside looking in, and actually I often hear from, and this is quite refreshing, I hear this from clinicians, that actually patients do, in most cases, know a lot more and have a lot more experience and exposure and understanding of this medicine than they do. But it's refreshing that they understand that. But it still does mean there is
It
a
does make
gap
you laugh, though.
in,
You
in
think, well,
evidence, right?
you just get the patients
Uh,
in, and they should be prescribing to the clinicians.
But that's not, there's no regulated environment that's going to say that's
Well,
permissible,
that's what I'm
are
just
there?
trying
Is
to
there?
drive
So,
towards. So it's,
uh,
we sometimes we have to drive towards the blindingly obvious, but I think it's
I know.
important because
Mm,
these companies imply in the people that they hire to do that work, they sort of fudge the information. It's all a bit blurry. So yes,
mm,
many people will know about what it is that they need, but an equal amount of people as the market grows, because we talk about it as a market rather than a health provision a lot of the time, won't know because they're coming in because they can, and they think it might help with A, B, C, or D, correct?
Yes, I suppose so. It's just as you know, cannabis is different to any other type of medicine, and when you have a very formal set of regulation and requirements that isn't fit for, that doesn't really suit, it's not that it's not fit, it doesn't suit it in its, best possible way, and that it makes it very difficult to, because you're kind of aligning a circle into a square box. It's and that's kind of what it feels like. But for me, I suppose having that transparency and actually understanding the experiences of others, but more so than that, the actual consistency of the products over time. But there are a lot of good initiatives in the UK. The University of West of England, Bristol, is doing a course for understanding medical cannabis. So that is really positive. But you know, when petrol combustion engines were, manufactured, there wasn't petrol stations. And I think that it is, it's a 7-year-old industry in the UK, but that's why I'm very curious and interested to look at Australia and how they've kind of solved some of the problems that we are
Well, I
facing.
mean, the
But,
problem is
it doesn't mean it's going to fit.
they haven't solved a lot of the problems, and in the process of solving the problems, the companies lose their profit margins, and then that's what we're seeing at the moment. And actually, the TGA are about to come out with a whole lot of new regulations, and the companies are teetering a bit at the moment because like in a lot of places, they rush towards a mini gold rush without really sorting out the problems in advance. And I presume in the UK, like the Australia, most of these prescriptions are telemedicine prescriptions. They're not people walk into the clinic and are seen, and the doctor taps you on the knee in the old-fashioned carry-on cannabis doctor sense. It's all like this as we're talking on Zoom. What's wrong with you? What do you need? Oh, I've got something that used to be called something in the States, but is now coming under white label, and we've called it something else. I think that'll work for you.
Mm. Yeah, and they just don't have visibility of the products, do they? We
No.
don't have visibility of the products. It's all virtual, it's all distributed. It comes directly from the pharmacist, who typically most patients don't speak to. They speak to their clinician and have their application, or whichever form that clinic decides to provide the limited information to you, as a lot of patients do find. I remember in Europe, there were two particular companies looking to merge together, and the government stepped in, the regulators stepped in and said, you can't merge these companies together because we won't have a choice. Yet, in a healthcare environment in the UK, what we see is patients signing up to one clinic, not getting visibility of what other services and products are available, not getting the information that they need, dropping off because they don't understand what it is that they're getting, and they keep getting products that aren't fit for purpose for them, and then or moving to another clinic and realizing that actually, there might be a little bit better or a little bit worse, but actually the whole system has room for improvement.
To me, you see, it's the same as Australia. It's like you go to one shop, and that shop doesn't have what you want, so you try another shop. And the word clinic, they're basically shops. And they're shops, and you're buying products. You're not going to clinics and buying, medical health benefit products, if you want to call them that. But I mean, if you have anything, if you go to the normal pharmacy anywhere, and you talk to a pharmacist. This is why I don't understand with Australia and with the UK. And I'm sorry if I'm dragging you off what we'll talk about the website. We'll come back to that in a second. But it seems really obvious that you would just talk. You would talk with existing pharmacy companies and pharmacy retail outlets who have pretty strict rules. I mean, I go crazy every time I go to the UK because I go to Tesco's and I can't buy more than about 3 aspirin before somebody jumps down your throat. And this system that's been created for cannabis seems to, if you can work it, seems to go the other way, get what you want from where you want quite easily, just that it won't work for you.
Yeah, I suppose I can't answer that because I am exactly the same position as every other patient, and I just see what my clinic offers. So I can give you my experience, but actually that's not
And
representative of the
can you only
market.
go to
So
one clinic and be registered with one clinic? You can't be registered with multiple clinics?
you cannot be registered with multiple clinics at the same time.
And
And some
how
clinics,
do they know you're not I mean, there isn't a database, as you said.
that's a very good question, and I don't know the answer to that. I do know that clinics incentivize transfers from other clinics, as you would expect, with lots of movement of patients. And yeah, some clinics own their pharmacy, and some
I
clinics
might
use
test that out.
external
I might have a little
pharmacies.
website. I might have a
Mm.
website that sees how many clinics I can register living in Jakarta as a UK citizen. Just just to see, it might be quite fun. But look, I'm sorry, I'm taking you off the topic of and what you're doing is really important, I think, because that's what I was trying to set out. There's a whole lot of ifs, buts, and grays
Mm,
in the UK system, and a lot of it is designed by government because the last thing they want is this on the NHS, and then they'd have to pay
mm,
for it. Although they might well happy to pay for metal balls that go into all our knees as we get older, but for some reason
mm,
cannabis when you're younger that might delay the metal balls in your knees. We can't be having that. So is
mm.
is that what drove you to devise the site, or were you hearing from other patients they were just so confused about what they were getting, and at least if they thought they could share the information, it could help other people narrow down the set of choices that might work for them because the product's not
Mm.
cheap, is it?
No, no, you spend a huge amount of money on the medicine, and I hate to say it, but I was kind of selfish because I was actually trying to solve my problem because I have 300 products and I have CBD, THC, maybe it's a sativa, maybe it's an indica. And if it doesn't say anything, I'm like, well, what does that mean? Is that a hybrid or do they just not know? And you have all this information, all these products, and I frequently was ordering products that were not really best suited for me. And I know everyone is different, but I was looking around online. I kept finding these odd scattered reviews. I didn't know if they're patients. I didn't know if they had the current batch I was going to get. And there's a lot of, variation in consistency and also whether that product was consistently supplied as well, because it's a medicine. And I personally find I want to change product every now and again for tolerance and just for, when it's a medicine you take regularly, it's nice to have that. But actually, I want to have a few products that always work for me. And I'm still trying to work out what those products are now. So I wanted to create a place, and it goes back to the kind of government aspect, a place where patients can register and be anonymous, but verified as patients. So that can collect, the actual evidence that we need to be able to say, well, this is the medicine, this is the suppliers I want to work with, this is the suppliers that, need to improve in these areas. And actually, it goes back to the advocacy and process at the beginning that it starts to give patients, the voice to actually say what is good and what isn't. Because at the moment, I'm looking at employment studies, like when they do satisfaction scores on employment studies, I think it was like 70% of people are not honest. And I just think, is that the same with like regional control trials and proms, that actually this is your clinician, and if you can't sign up to more than one at the same time, then are you going to be fully transparent and candid with that clinician when he's writing all of this stuff down? Yeah, it just seems like it's extremely necessary to be able to actually help the industry improve and benefit patients from not only the transparency but also from understanding that their input actually, will change things over time, because, once this is visible, people won't accept it. And I also believe that at the moment, if you had no previous exposure to the medicine, if you came into the industry as I have seen it, then you probably wouldn't be a patient any longer because of the confusion and uncertainty and lack of transparency.
So let's start with the patients first, and I'll come to the companies after. Approximately how many patients have come to the site? And a general idea, what are they telling you? And are they identifying products that work better for something, for, for certain things? And how are you defining that? Because ranking things doesn't really work with this. How are you defining that when you get that data?
Yeah, and it's a really hard problem because of the regulations in place. So first of all, you can't advertise this medicine. That's illegal. So there are obviously security and verification aspects in place, but in terms of presenting the data, we do not edit the data that is being collected at the moment because it's either accepted or rejected. It meets our community guidelines or it doesn't. But it is very difficult because even if someone is writing their own opinion and their own view and perspective, if they start saying that this is, cured my, I don't know, my broken leg, well, you can't. So it is a very
I know. Look, it's a minefield
yeah.
because you don't know what the product is. You don't know sometimes you don't know where it is sourced. And on the other side of the equation, you don't, generally people don't know what the law and legislation and the regulations, and the courts haven't decided what the law, the regulations and the rules are. Nobody knows. There's just a whole bunch of stuff out there, and you've got to chuck it down your gob in a way, and to see what works for each individual. And for you taking on a job that is trying to provide definitions to help people, you're caught between a rock and a hard place, because you're caught between people who don't want to give you too much information, and then on the other side, if you give too much information, you've got the law telling you you can't, and the courts will have to decide what you can and you can't say. And because, like me, you're an independent data collector, something that's quite new in terms of a job, you don't have the money to go through that court system, and therefore they then put you out of business until, British courts, you can't appear in front of a judge for 5 years anyway, by which time, who knows? So it must be a really complicated conundrum to try and solve in order to do the simple thing that you're trying to do, which is make people's lives better.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think there's so many codes of practice and guidelines and regulation, and there's the law is supposed to be unambiguous. Yet what we find is contradictions across different. It's a minefield, but essentially it's morally and ethically right. There should be no healthcare industry in the world that doesn't provide patients information on the medicine that they're getting. And I think that when you're collecting it in a structured and presenting it in a moderated way, you're actually able to take the value from that and aggregate the data over time. Because if suddenly 80% of people say that this product is a star, then it's good value for money, or it solved my outcome, whatever that outcome was, and that has the terpene profile that you generally look for, you can start to understand a bit better, and then you can use that information to actually speak to your clinician, and maybe you'll be educating them, or you'll have an intellectual conversation, and both of you will get more out of that. So it's really around giving the voice back to the patients to understand and collect the evidence to prove that
do you
this is
think
sustainable.
that maybe part of what you're doing will have to be, once you've created something that looks good, you've got a reasonable amount of data, and it can show something, whatever that something is, really one of the more important things is going to be engaging with professional associations in medicine and law and similar, that nursing, to say, look, you can't do this, but I have done this, in order to generate political and legal change. Can you contribute to this conversation. Do you think that's part of the strategy? Because going straight to government, we know doesn't work in the UK. It's just not going to work. But they do listen, as you say, they'll partly listen to academia, but they'll wait 10 years for academia to do something. So is it this combination of associations, academia, and data in order to push government departments and those within NHS trusts to try and come to trying to learn to understand what is being spoken about?
It's a very, very good question. And I suppose from my perspective, to really get engagement from government and, senior politicians, you need to have something of value to them now. Actually, they don't really want to hear it. They don't really want to spend the time.
And they want a political alliance that scares them slightly, I would suggest, in order to, excuse my French, shift their asses, as they would say, into gear.
I was always taught to never speak about politics and never speak about politics and networking, because you always just have different views. And I think there's just I know that GW Pharmaceuticals, I know that there's politicians that had shares in GW Pharmaceuticals way before legislation, and I can see the industry and I can see the different agendas that everyone has. And, unfortunately, a lot of things are not fit for purpose at the moment, especially with the change in technology. I couldn't go and work with academia and get government funding, because by the time that funding is even released to me, I would have already completed the project. It's just not a sensible way to actually move at the pace that we're able to these days. You look at countries that much more efficient than the UK are doing much, a significant amount of infrastructure, building a significant amount more of infrastructure, and the UK is it feels like it's
a laggard. It's a laggard.
Yeah, somewhat.
I mean, look, I know I'm forcing these answers out of you, but you're like one of the first people I've had the opportunity to have this discussion with, because a lot of the early medical cannabis activists have already created their little political worlds, and to get into them is nigh on impossible. That's why I was really interested to talk to you, because you're coming in with a lot of experience, but you don't seem to be part of that network of individuals who are already tied into whatever it is they're tied into. So they keep on coming out with the same argument. It looked like what you were doing is more democratic and more refreshing.
Thank you. No, that's really nice to hear, and I'm happy to speak anytime and kind of share the UK perspective, at least from my understanding anyway. And I can't speak for everyone else, of course, but you're right. There's a variety of people in the industry, and they've all come from such a range of different backgrounds, and kind of coming into it and just observing and just looking around. And I mean, I stepped my toe in, the protests 7-8 years ago, and it's a bit surreal when I walk into an event and someone says, "Have you seen our product?" and pulls out 3 bags of cannabis. But there are people in the industry that are really passionate, and there are people who've come into the industry.
Well, that's what we haven't got long to run, and
could
that's
be
what
better reasons, right?
I wanted to ask you that next. Tell me something positive about the money-making side of the industry with people who they running companies. So what Britain is good at is creating really good small companies that can do things that change things, not just within the UK, but around the world. And I want to hear that story from the UK, but I feel as though I'm not hearing it at all. And I've met a couple of people, and I just got that sort of press release coming out of their mouths, and then there's a lot of associations involved with cannabis, and they're impenetrable because they're little cliques. They remind me of being at school. I went to one of those nice English public schools, and it was full of those sort of cliquey people who just drove me crazy. And because now I've lived overseas, I come back to the UK and I feel I can't penetrate those sorts of cliques. and it's not benefiting what the UK is really good at.
I was discussing this with a friend a few days ago, and the strengths and weaknesses of the UK. And you know, we're great at creating ideas and creating solutions. We're not very good at scaling those solutions. Whereas obviously that's an economic and geo kind of political, I don't know, a conversation really. But I think there's such a culture of hierarchy and class in the UK,
It's why I left.
and it's I mean, thankfully, I'm able to kind of match the full scope. I hope I would be considered to do anyway, but it's just as you know, the UK inherently has lots of ways of doing things, and
That are
it's
impenetrable to
hard, it's
people
deep
from the
rooted.
outside.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
deep rooted, and you know, that's why we need people to come in with a different view and disrupt it, and people to actually question what they're doing and to say what if rather than no, or rather than, you know, this is a bad idea but I don't have another solution. I'm very out for like critique and telling me where I'm going wrong, but as long as it's a constructive conversation to move forward. And so, sometimes people don't, organizations and people don't want that, and people feel that, you know, they've built something. This is that people don't like change, right? Like, I love change, but people don't like change.
You
It's
know,
causes
when I
friction.
go back to the UK, it's all about nothing's changed, but change is around you the whole time. And I come from a small market town in West Sussex, and it's the same, but it's entirely different at the same time. But if they're there, they don't see that change. Yeah, and you know, that is the story of
Mm.
Britain basically over the last 500 years, is that, you know, I just go back and laugh because I feel as though, yeah, I'm in a little England skit every time I go back. But yeah, but that's essentially the issue, because there are people there who are making that change, but they sort of stay invisible within that environment. And I'm sorry if we're going, for listeners, if we're going too deeply into the English psyche, but I rarely get to speak to somebody who sort of tries to do something positive in the UK, but act outside that sort of environment. And I get a sense that that's what you're trying to do.
Yes, but preferably without ruffling any feathers, you know. It's really hard. You can't please everybody, but yeah, you may as well try, and please the majority, or at least for the right reasons, you know,
Look, and
because
look, we haven't got long to go. So what?
mm,
Let's remind people, because I don't think I said what's the name of the site and what's the URL, and you know, just give a little couple of bits of information about how people can submit information.
yeah, sure. So the platform, it's called CannaBias. It is cannabias.io or .co.uk. And we allow patients verified patients to register. We complete the verification manually and via human. It's not AI verified. You don't provide any personal information, so it's fully anonymous. And as soon as it's like a sharing is caring. You've heard that phrase before. As soon as you leave your first review and that becomes accepted, meets our moderation guidelines, then you basically get access to the other information that other patients have shared. And yeah, as we continue, it will grow and hopefully provide the evidence needed to actually change things for the
Well,
better.
look, that's fantastic. And I'll provide more information and links on our information page on the site that goes out with the podcast. I wish I could talk for longer, Arron, but of course we've already run. Yeah, we've run 30 minutes, and it feels like 5 minutes. You got me. You got me onto one of those subjects I could go on forever.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
thank you very much for being on the
no,
Karma Koala podcast.
likewise, it was. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to speaking soon.
Live and direct, live and I take no jive.
Legalize it. So, how much can a koala bear? Koala bear, koala bear. Koala bear. Barry pulls a joint out of his pocket. Bill says, "Great, Barry, a reefer."